this is a aptly titled panel, and really let me check my collar. Make sure it's okay. And really at the essence of social entrepreneurship, which is really about eliciting change in the world, not imposing it, but bringing change in a very natural way. And I'm just reminded by a very, very brief anecdote. I was interviewing someone who's in the business of trying to get people in the developing world to use very cheap water filters on a regular basis. And they said, we tried, we would talk about health benefits for the family and so forth. And then a local person said, well, why don't you try asking people to get the water filters so that they would have the privilege of serving filtered water to their guests? This was in India. And this was actually far more effective than all of the other sales pitches that had been previously used. And so there's a whole cultural value set. There's probably hundreds of years of history behind why that is a better pitch. But to work and to appreciate those nuances really gets to the essence of the ability to really be effective in bringing change. We have 4 absolutely wonderful panelists here whose work literally spans the globe and touches on almost every continent. And just before I begin, I'm going to bring this back full circle to the opening plenary. Those of you might remember that Karen C., from International Bridges to Justice, made a wonderful point when she mentioned that there is a global culture in legal defenders all around the world, whether they're in Cambodia or China. They share this universal value, and that's what really connects them and sews the world together. And she said that our ability to connect to something universal between us is what really helps move the world forward. So this is something that really comes through very, very strongly in the work of these 4 panelists. So I'm going to introduce all 4 of them first, and then each one is going to tell a story that really, from their work, that really shows what this means. Rupert Howes, you saw the film yesterday, he became the chief executive of the Marine Stewardship Council in October 2004. It's the world's leading marine eco-labeling and certification program for wild capture fisheries. It has offices in Tokyo, Sydney, London, Seattle, and The Hague. And the organization's overarching objective is to contribute to reversing the decline in wild capture fisheries, perhaps the second biggest sustainability challenge facing the world after climate change. And the strategy is, of course, to identify and promote the best environmental choice in seafood. Something about Rupert is that he grew up in a family of actors and musicians, and he was the Kellogg's Cornflakes kid for a series of ads that ran in the UK in 1968 to 1970. Okay. Next, we have Fiona Muchembere, is the program manager for institutional development for CAMFED International, which is also a Skoll Award winner. Fiona is a Zimbabwean lawyer whose life bears testimony to the challenges of attaining education for the girl child in Zimbabwe. She grew up in poverty. She had to struggle to be able to attend school, including working every weekend and holiday to finance her primary and secondary education. She was one of the first recipients of support from CAMFED, which stands for the Campaign for Female Education, one of the first to graduate from university. She's also one of the founding members of CAMFED Association, which is an alumni organization of beneficiaries of CAMFED that seeks to increase advocacy on the importance of girls' education. It's an emerging social movement that now numbers more than 8,000 rural young women in 4 countries, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Zambia, and Tanzania. And one of her happiest or proudest moments is when, as a lawyer, she was representing a poor widow who didn't have any legal documents, and she managed to get the registrar to transfer the estate into this woman's name, despite the very, very serious challenge of making that happen without any papers. So that was a... There is Vicky Colbert, sorry, I'm going to say the Colbert Report. Vicky Colbert de Arboleda, founder and director of the Escuela Nueva Foundation and co-author and founder of the Escuela Nueva model, which has won worldwide recognition for improving the quality of basic education, particularly in remote and isolated areas. It was initiated in rural Colombia and has been adapted to urban and migrant populations and now been transferred or adopted in 16 countries, reaching over 5 million children. Recently, Vicky received one of the first 4 Clinton Global Citizenship Awards from President Clinton. And Vicky wanted me to mention she's a dog trainer, and she's trained all her dogs to play the piano, but she wanted to be clear that this was not through Pavlovian methods, but through empathy. And Jacqueline Novogratz IV is the founder and the CEO of the Acumen Fund, a nonprofit global venture fund whose investments focus on delivering affordable, critical goods and services to poor people, healthcare, water, housing, and energy, through innovative market-oriented approaches. The Acumen Fund currently manages more than $25 million in investments in South Asia and in Eastern and Southern Africa. And Jacqueline told me a story that she had a sort of a revelation about the world when she was jogging in the hills in Kigali, and 12 years earlier, she had given a blue sweater to Goodwill in the United States, and she saw this boy jog, a 10-year-old boy along the hills, and he was wearing a blue sweater, and so she turned over the collar, and it said Jacqueline Novogratz on the back of the collar. So she felt very connected to the world at that moment and devoted herself. So. To Rupert.
Okay, before I start, I've just got to make sure my collar's straight, just keeping that theme. Thank you for that introduction. As many of you will have seen in that absolutely fantastic film, if I say so myself, last night, you'll have got a good overview of the Marine Stewardship Council. And what I found so incredible about that film is it told the story so effectively. And I think that's a challenge that many social entrepreneurs face, is how we tell our own stories, because they're often very complex, and to get it across in a succinct way that engages people and motivates people and ultimately changes behavior is a real art. And I just have to say at the start of this, that film is going to be tremendously useful for my organization as we go forward. But a sort of brief summary, as you will have seen, we run a marine eco-labeling and certification program. It sounds incredibly dull. We have a standard for sustainable fishing. We operate a certification and labeling program with all that entails, with third-party certifiers, evidence, science, chains of custody. But really what we're trying to do is to transform the global seafood industry onto a sustainable footing. We have a vision of healthy, productive marine ecosystems, of vibrant fishing communities, and of sustainable seafood supplies for now and into the future. And you would think that with such a clear vision and a common interest across the world and these diverse cultures that we operate in, everybody would sign up for that. It just makes common sense. But I can honestly say in my 3.5 years as chief exec of the MSC, as I've personally and as my organization is engaged with this diverse, complex cultures around the world that makes up the global fishing industry, it has really felt like trench warfare. And I don't exaggerate when we come and deal with some of the vested interests that would really not like us to succeed, and some of the prejudices, suspicions, doubts, and just sort of not bothered attitudes that we address when we're dealing from fishers through the whole supply chain of processors, retailers, to governments. And I struggled, actually, when I was asked to be on this panel. I thought, what story can I tell? There are so many, and I sort of wanted to sort of drill down into the detail of some of the specific anecdotes. And I thought, well, maybe I'll sort of try and sort of talk more generally, but depending on how much time I get, and I'm notorious for going over time, despite having my watch in front of me, I'll try and sort of give the overview. I mean, the global fishing industry is the last global industry harvesting a wild resource for food. That's incredible in itself. It employs 200 million people around the world. And therefore, in a way, it sort of connects all of us, whether it's because we love the marine environment and we're concerned about the marine environment, whether we eat seafood, as 1 billion people on this planet depend on seafood for their only source of animal protein, or whether we just have a sort of general interest in these issues, you know, fishing, marine environment, and all the rest of it. And MSC is trying to operate globally because seafood is the most traded primary commodity in the world, more than beef, wheat, dairy combined. It's quite remarkable, and half of it comes from the developing world. So back to this issue of diverse cultures and differing views. If MSC is going to succeed in its mission, we have to engage globally. We have to engage with small-scale developing world fisheries, large-scale fisheries. We have to engage with the supply chain. But most importantly, we have to engage with every one of you in this room, because what MSC is trying to do is to empower individuals, to enable them to make the best environmental choice. And that through selecting MSC certified and labeled seafood. And that means we have to get out there. And when I started in this role, I was amazed at the hostility. We had national governments who were incredibly suspicious of the MSC. What right did this undemocratically elected non-government organisation have to come into our countries and question our sovereign right to manage our fisheries resources? That was quite hard to deal with. We had a fishing industry that in itself is hugely diverse. You know, I go to Norway quite frequently and I meet small coastal fishermen operating in very remote coastal communities up north of the Arctic Circle. They are completely different fishers to the fishers of the big trawling enterprises that operate offshore. And yet we're trying to engage with all of them to say this is in your best interest. For many of these fishers, they felt we are just another green group. You're coming to stop us fishing. You're coming to threaten our livelihoods. But equally, we had huge battles with the conservation community. It's quite remarkable, but when I joined the MSC, there was a concerted effort by some in the conservation community to take the MSC out, which is what I was told in my first few weeks of starting. Apart from discovering that they'd fired a third of the workforce in the few months before I started, they were down to 4 weeks funding. It was quite interesting to hear that there was one major funder contemplating, 2 minutes, oh no, contemplating taking this out in our entirety. But let's move on rapidly to solutions. So the vision sounds like everybody should join up. They haven't. How have we overcome that? Through persistence. We've overcome this by getting on planes and getting out and seeing people. And whilst I worry about the carbon footprint, we do offset our carbon emissions, I think we've begun to turn the corner by engaging with people. Again, back to Karen's opening comments in the plenary. We have so much similarities. We are all interconnected. You know, all life is indivisible. You know, if you can connect with people and actually make them understand that you're on their side and you're trying to help them, you get them on board. So we get the wonderful Paul Joy, who you saw in that film, a local fisherman who is now a champion for the MSC. And you contrast that small-scale community fishery with the might of Walmart. That, you know, on a 1-hour meeting, they changed their procurement policy to say 100% MSC. Quite remarkable. So in part, it's about getting out there, going back and going back again. I was told Norway and Iceland would never engage with the MSC. You know, in a year, we now have 7 Norwegian fisheries. We have a Japanese office. Things can change. The other part of the success is getting in-country representatives because they have more empathy, more understanding. So it sounds very grand, all of these offices over the world, and we're opening one in Cape Town this year, one in Hong Kong. We've just opened one in Halifax. We've opened one in Florida. These are one-person outfits operating out of their garages, but they are out there engaging as foot soldiers. My very last comment, because I appreciate I'm probably overrunning already, is we've also formalized structures to bring all of our stakeholders in to help us. So the MSC invests considerable sums of money in our governance structures. We have an international board of 14 made up of high-level industry people, top environmental NGOs, ex-government scientists, and academics. We also have a stakeholder council of 40 people made up of that constituent stakeholders as well. And we have a technical advisory board to advise us on the science, again made up of some of the leading experts. And I think this persistence, cultural sensitivity, getting out there, but formalizing these structures has really helped MSC to overcome some of the barriers. My final comment is, whilst it all looks very rosy and easy, we're not there yet. As the film said, we have 7% of global fisheries in the program. We need to get to 100%, so when any of you go out and eat seafood, just make sure you ask for MSC certified labeled seafood to create that demand pool to bring them in. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you. Thank you. And now, Fiona, thank you.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that as a young woman who grew up in rural Africa and struggled to gain an education, and when my parents were almost succumbing to an economic reality of poverty and not being able to support me to continue with school, an organization, CAMFED, came in and supported me. They acted on my case, so I feel very privileged to have my voice heard at this platform. The campaign for female education, CAMFED, the overview is that it is working in different African cultures to empower girls and young women through supporting education of vulnerable children. They support these children through primary secondary and tertiary or vocational education until they able to be economically independent. CAMFED has worked extensively in diverse rural communities in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, and Ghana for over 15 years now. In 2007, CAMFED support benefited over 400,000 children. An amazing fact which bears testimony to the commitment of African communities to education is that in all these 15 years, not once did CAMFED experience a case of parents turning down an opportunity to have a girl educated or withdraw their girl child from school. So we really see the commitment that African communities have to education. And from the outset, what we have learned that it is important that we bring men and women together in a problem-solving forum to tackle the problems that girls face in accessing education. This has enabled us to unravel and challenge the deep-seated notions as to why girls have traditionally been disadvantaged compared to boys, and sort of explored the myth that culture, rather than poverty, has been the driving force behind girls' exclusion. We have established broadly representative communities that create alliances with key people in the community, those who have influence on girls' lives, bringing together local government authorities from the health, from social welfare, from the police, bringing them together with chiefs, school staff, and parents. And our experience is that we have come to appreciate that we have paid so much attention to the gender and power dynamics in communities that affect their ability to operate effectively in solving problems that girls and women face. This has led to the appreciation of how important it is to have young women who have completed school in these communities to take a place at the table alongside local authorities, representing a tangible shift in women's status. These young women, together, like myself, we founded the Kama Network, which David mentioned, which now has a membership of over 8,000 young women across the 4 countries. And we enjoy a new status as role models in our communities, giving us confidence and security to bring the deep-seated problems at the center, which is vital in the context of poverty and HIV, which increases women's vulnerability. We have also learned that it is also important to work with traditional leadership. Traditional leaders have become very strong allies in supporting our work in African communities. One good example I can give you is of a chief called Chief Mutekeza in rural Zimbabwe, who has been a patron of CAMFED's work for 15 years now. He has really supported our expansion into the other districts, going to talk with the other chiefs about the effects of exclusion of girls from education. We have been with him to Zambia, we have been with him to Ghana, to also lobby the other traditional leadership to support girls' education. And through mobilizing the community, in one of the districts in Tanzania called Iringa, which is known for providing young girls as domestic workers for the people in Dar es Salaam, the parents and local leaders now appreciate the importance of girls' education and are really lobbying for the return of these girls to school through CAMFED supports. One day when a CAMFED staff was accompanying a girl from Dar es Salaam back to Iringa to go back to school, after having worked as a domestic worker, she met another woman in Dar es Salaam who said to her, "Oh, you are going to Iringa, can you bring, when you're coming back, can you bring a domestic worker for me?" And she said, "Can you not realize I'm just taking another girl back so that she can go to school, so I'm not bringing you any domestic worker." And also we have, we are also reaching out to older women in the community who have formed themselves into what we call mother support groups. And these mother support groups are using their own local philanthropy to support children left vulnerable by HIV/AIDS. And I was particularly moved when a group of mothers in one rural area in Zimbabwe, through the exchanges that we have, they heard that girls staying at a hostel at a school in another district across the country, they were not attending school because they didn't have any food. And they mobilized themselves to gather maize, which they then collected and sent to that other district so that the children can attend school. And this has also generated competition with men not wanting to be left behind. They are also mobilizing their labor and resources to support girls' safety in schools, offering regular maintenance of hostels to ensure girls from distant communities have safe accommodation near the school. And in one instance where they realized that there was only one bathroom for girls, they said that the mothers lobbied for this hostel. We are going to build another bathroom for the girls because there were so many girls staying at that hostel so that they could be nearer the school. And finally, we have also learned that it is very important to involve beneficiaries in the design and implementation of programs. Rural young women like me who, through CAMFED, got an opportunity to be educated, they testify to the transforming power of education, both at an individual as well as community level. My family looks up to me for support. I'm the firstborn in a family of 6, and I'm supporting all my younger brothers and sisters to go to school. And I also support other children from my extended family, and I think at the moment I'm supporting over 22 children to go to school. Thank you. So if you can imagine that each and every one of us in the network of 8,000 is supporting a similar number of children, the ripple effects of girls' education are really being felt, and communities are beginning to really appreciate that. And so it is important that we also bring to platforms such as this the beneficiaries of our programs and to give them a voice and the confidence to say, to testify to the support that all the social entrepreneurs in this room have been giving them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. So I'm told that we only have 15 minutes left, and this has just totally flown by. I can't believe it. So you two just take it and do it. Vicky Colbert de Arboleda.
We were very fortunate to initiate Escuela Nueva in Colombia because of the wonderful diversity, cultural diversity we have. It's like 5 countries in one. The Andean, the coffee region, the Caribbean, the Pacific West Coast, which is one of the most authentic African groups, the Amazonic. So this was a good soil for us to think about working in other countries. So this was a wonderful opportunity. I'll describe some examples of the things we had to start looking at when you have such richness in culture. For example, very simple, practical learning corners. Escuela Nueva is a very experiential, transformative type of pedagogy, collaborative learning. So because of this, we had to introduce good things we know about education models. So we introduced the learning corners that Maria Montessori mentioned almost at the beginning of the century, little learning corners in the classrooms where children recuperate the oral tradition, their stories, their jokes, their recipes, their rhymes, their riddles, and they classify all these subjects in little boxes. And they themselves produce many of these materials because learning takes place through a situated context. It's much more meaningful and relevant. This is the way children learn. But we had an experience. We got a visit from people from Senegal. So we took them to the most authentic Pacific West Coast of African origins in Colombia. And they went to visit the schools. And they started finding words that were from Senegal. So this was amazing. So immediately we saw the importance not only of having this for learning, for supporting learning for children, but we established an alliance with the Museum of Arts and Tradition, because in this way we started recuperating all the culture of the 5 different regions. So this was a wonderful example. Another example was in the coffee region. Children would have to go and participate in the harvests. That's a family tradition. They participate in that. So they would leave the school and then repeat and drop out, not come back. So we had to adapt the school to the local context. We had to introduce flexibility, flexible promotion systems, modularized ways of working so children would know and come back to the school and pick up where they had left before. So we had to adapt the school to the situation of the community and of children instead of the other way around, because in this way we reduce dropout and repetition. Another example is learning materials, textbooks. We could not just go out and buy Macmillan and drop them into the schools. We had to think of a very cost-effective way, large-scale economy, a way of providing books for children, but we had to have them locally open-ended, so the teachers could incorporate the local community in the process of learning. And of course, we had to think of how we can finance all these things. And last but not least, Escuela Nueva works with the community. It's not only a curriculum, it's a systemic large-scale reform. So we had to look for ways that we could bring the parents in the learning process, that the teachers would know what's in the community with very simple instruments like family cards. So the teacher would know who's the carpenter, who's the artist, who's the sportsman, to bring alive the local culture in the learning process in a very pragmatic and simple way, and especially to ensure that children self-esteem was boosted, because even if their parents were illiterate, they would feel proud that they have knowledge and that this knowledge is very important to respect the culture and the tradition. So as yesterday was said in one of the panels, Mary Gordon, in the panel of ethics and empathy, which I thought was wonderful, schools are places where children have a sense of belonging, and this is what we try to do. Thank you.
You were under by 1 minute.
Whoa.
Impressive. And now Jacqueline.
All right, I'll try to do 5 points, 5 minutes. David asked me if I would talk about some of the lessons learned over the last 20 years of navigating culture through the work that we've done previously with microfinance in Rwanda and now with venture capital for the poor with Acumen Fund. The first one, I can't think of a better story than the one that President Carter so eloquently gave us last night around how to bring what Ashraf Ghani would call a creative disruption into a traditional community with respect and empathy. The way that he talked to the village chief, not saying, we're here to help you, but we recognize the sacredness of your water and therefore can move from there to build a solution that makes sense to you and makes sense to what we know is good for the world. That said, I think one of the second big lessons that I've learned is that there's also a risk of over-empathy, that we've talked about empathy a lot in this conference, and I haven't heard the over-empathy piece. But we, as Fiona said, I think sometimes we attribute to culture what is really due to poverty, and we feel sorry for people, so we reduce our expectations rather than setting standards really high and assuming people will reach them. Roshani Zafar, who's a Skoll Fellow and also an Acumen Fund investee, talked about when she first started this microfinance bank, they would sit in villages sometimes for 10 hours making the women repay them to let them know that they were serious, and now they've got pretty much 100% repayment rate. The third lesson that I've learned through Acumen particularly is that the market is the best listening device that we have. I'm going to give an example that's more on the commercial side, but we are just beginning to understand the transformative power of markets to really listen to who low-income people are across culture. And it's too difficult navigating the myriad forces that we need to navigate through culture to come in just with our assumptions. And the example I'll use is medicine shops, which Acumen Fund saw a great model for delivering pharmacy services into the middle classes in India. And we approached the entrepreneur and we said, what would it take to experiment with this model into low-income markets? And clearly it took money. We put $1.5 million of equity. We helped build a business plan, and we put an Acumen Fund fellow in for 9 months to try to roll out what became the Sehat program. But we started with a number of cultural assumptions, my own misguided ones included. One being that let's take the model, this beautiful air-conditioned, glass-fronted model where the doctor would be free and it was 1,200 square feet, and just transplant it into the slums, because we would build a vision of dignity for people. And if I showed you the first one, and you were a first-time donor, you would probably give me money because they were so beautiful and lots of people were there all the time. But we listened to the market instead, because we were asking people to be customers here. What we found was that people felt that our spending priorities were misguided, that the glass front was unwelcoming, that a free doctor was obviously of low quality. And so within 3 months, the whole business model was transformed in this enterprise. Charged 50 cents for the 30 cents for the doctor, and then you could deduct it from the high-quality generic drugs next door. Got rid of the glass, so it was open-fronted, and moved the size of the clinic down to 400 square feet. Those clinics are now not only the most utilized, but they're the most profitable on a square foot basis. The market is an extraordinary listening device. I can't help but respond to what Paul said, because I so appreciate the brilliance of it, but also this notion of private-public partnerships. And I need to share a story, because I think one of the reasons we've not been so great at it as a world, and it's so related to culture, is because it is so complex. The story I'll share, I was just in the Thar desert in Pakistan this week, and for anyone who's ever been there, it's literally like the moon. There is no water. You see a camel and a random donkey. But of course, I was with the social entrepreneur Sono Kangarani, who, with inimitable optimism, kept saying, "It's spring, and look at all the color everywhere." And I was like, "It's 115 degrees, and I see a palette of gray, you know." But over time, I could see this incredible color. And anyway, we were driving for 8.5 hours. And suddenly, we see this little line of yellow in the distance. And as we drive up, it's eight acres of 7-foot sunflowers that have been developed from a very complex process that started with our own Amitabh Siddhangi, who's another Skoll fellow, who had developed a drip irrigation in India for low-income farmers to increase their productivity. When Dr. Sono, who's a Dalit, one of the untouchables left in this isolated part of Pakistan, heard of it, he asked us at Acumen, how do we do a technology transfer? Sounds easy, but you have to navigate the cultures of Pakistan and India, and all of the bureaucracy that entails. Then getting energy so that you can get water so that you can use the drip irrigation is not affordable to the farmers, particularly with oil prices the way they are. So the government needs to come in and provide solar. Because of Dr. Sono and Tardeep, he's got a respected private sector partner that can bring solar in, connected to the drip irrigation, which is affordable to the farmers. So they're contributing as well. And now we've got the situation where we're looking at 1,000 acres that are providing so much hope and possibility and income to these farmers that for the first time in their lives, they don't have to migrate in the off-season. And when I talked to the one farmer, I said to him, what would you do now? And he said, I will educate my children. And this very cynical Pakistani development worker with me said, and what about your girls? And he said, well, I'll educate my girls too. And he said, well, and the Pakistani development guy said, but it may mean that they will not wear the veil. And then the guy said, look, I want my daughters not to be discriminated against, and I want them to not discriminate against others as well. And I think it's such a story of how we have to pull all these pieces together, recognize it takes money and time, but also not underestimate who human beings are all around the world. And I know I'm out of time, but the last point really is the final piece is that all of us as human beings really need to change our culture. It's really for us to start thinking of ourselves as global citizens, taking on these big thorny issues across sectors and not being afraid to build models that may be messy at first, but over time will bring the kind of clarity that really can create change in the world. So thanks.
Great. Well, I know we have, we're just about out of time. We have 30 seconds. Just, this is absolute whirlwind, like swallowing a continent in a bite. Just to pull together some of the very central ideas. I mean, really, Jacqueline's asking the question: Can can we use markets in ways that we haven't even used them? What does the market 2.0 or market 3.0 look like? Can markets have emotional intelligence, have empathy built into their structures, in the decision-making structures at their core? And Vicky was talking about, really, how do we create structures that are adaptive to the rhythms of life of people, in this case, rural life, where the typical school day doesn't match the agricultural rhythm of life, and so you adapt it. And Fiona had mentioned just how important it is to find champions and patrons, especially when you're working with people in leadership position. You've got to find those individuals who are willing to speak to their peers. And Rupert said you really have to have structures. You have to have structured decision-making processes that really force people and get people together in a systematized listening process and decision-making process. And those have to be built into to the methodologies. So just very, very quick, some very quick takeaway points. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes. One is from Albert Einstein. Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding, particularly apt in today's world. And finally, Helen Keller. For those of you who don't know Helen Keller, she was deaf and mute and blind. And she said, no, she wasn't. Yes, she was. Got very confused. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with our heart. Thank you. Thank you very much.